Andor reshaped the galaxy by removing its most recognizable foundation. Without prophecy or mysticism, the story had no interest in chosen ones or predestined saviors. It focused on ordinary individuals navigating systems designed to crush them, turning the spotlight away from cosmic destiny and toward human consequence. In doing so, it reframed what Star Wars looks like when myth is stripped away and only lived reality remains. By eliminating the Force as a narrative tool, Andor exposed the political machinery of the Empire in a way no Jedi story could. There was no spiritual explanation for tyranny, no cosmic imbalance to blame. Oppression emerged through bureaucracy, surveillance, and compliance. Andor showed that the galaxy didn't need supernatural corruption to fall into darkness. It only needed people who stopped questioning the systems they served. The characters in Andor operate without the safety net of myth. When Cassian makes a decision, there's no prophecy hinting that he matters. When Maarva challenges the Empire's authority, she does so without hope for divine intervention. When Kino calls for unity in the prison, he does so without believing in anything beyond the moment. Their actions carry weight precisely because they occur in a world where no unseen power ensures justice. Removing the Force also removed narrative shortcuts. Without supernatural insight, characters must rely on observation, intuition, and strategy. There's no meditation to reveal truth, no vision to warn of danger. Tension grows because choices must be made without certainty. Every mistake becomes irreversible, and every success requires collaboration rather than destiny. The story becomes about effort, not fate. Andor's decision to exclude the Force also eliminated the moral simplicity that often accompanies Jedi-focused stories. The absence of mysticism forces characters to confront the messy realities of economic inequality, social manipulation, and generational fear. The rebellion is not a religious movement. It is a collective response to structural harm. That reframing makes the stakes clearer, because the problem is not imbalance in the Force, it is imbalance in society. The narrative reveals how rebellion spreads without symbols. There are no glowing sabers to rally behind, no legendary knights to inspire hope. Yet people still resist through small, individual acts that eventually form a movement. When Andor chooses to fight, it's not because a mentor told him he was destined for greatness. It's because ordinary injustice escalated into a personal tipping point. That shift grounds the rebellion in human experience rather than mythic inevitability. The absence of the Force amplifies vulnerability. Characters face imprisonment, exploitation, and surveillance with no spiritual framework to interpret their suffering. Their courage emerges not from belief in cosmic justice, but from understanding the consequences of inaction. Andor demonstrates that bravery does not require divine purpose. It requires awareness of harm and willingness to oppose it despite the cost. By removing Jedi from the equation, Andor challenges viewers to evaluate the Empire's reach through a civilian lens. Without supernatural battles, the galaxy's oppression becomes easier to understand. It spreads through labor systems, propaganda, taxation, and fear. This shift reveals that the Empire didn't rise because dark side users manipulated the Force. It rose because institutions enabled it, leaders justified it, and people adapted to it. Characters like Maarva function as ideological anchors, not because they channel cosmic principles, but because they articulate the experience of living under authoritarianism. Her perspective defines rebellion not as a mystical calling, but as a practical necessity. This interpretation doesn't replace the Force, it contextualizes it. Andor shows what happens when the galaxy forgets its spiritual foundations and must construct meaning without them. The show's refusal to incorporate mysticism reveals how deeply Star Wars usually relies on it. In most stories, the Force frames conflict, shapes morality, and resolves tension. Andor demonstrates that none of those devices are needed to tell a compelling story. The narrative thrives on grounded stakes, interpersonal dynamics, and structural tension. This approach proves that the Force can be absent without diminishing the power of the world. Andor's portrayal of rebellion exposes the limits of relying on chosen heroes. It argues that waiting for destiny delays action, while collective resistance accelerates it. When people take responsibility for change, instead of waiting for cosmic intervention, Resistance becomes sustainable instead of symbolic. The Force does not vanish from the galaxy. It becomes irrelevant to the decisions driving the rebellion's early momentum. By excluding the Force, Andor challenges viewers to question the role destiny plays in shaping historical narratives. When history is told through myth, individuals become footnotes under larger forces. When history is told through people, myth becomes secondary. Andor makes the Force irrelevant, not to diminish it, but to recontextualize it as one philosophy among many. The point is not to reject mysticism. It is to demonstrate that heroism does not depend on it. The result is a story that strengthens the Star Wars universe. Removing the Force as an active participant highlights how much the galaxy relies on ordinary choices. It reframes courage as a product of circumstance rather than destiny. Andor shows that the Force is not a requirement for meaningful storytelling. It's an optional lens. When removed, the galaxy becomes sharper, more grounded, and more reliant on human conviction. Andor makes the Force irrelevant by revealing that rebellion predates prophecy. People rise not because the universe wills it, but because they recognize injustice and respond. The Force becomes secondary because human agency becomes primary. That shift does not challenge Star Wars. It reinforces its foundation. The galaxy does not need mystics to fight oppression. It needs people who refuse to adapt to it. Andor strengthens the Star Wars universe by proving that its core themes survive without reliance on mysticism. Without Jedi or Sith, the focus shifts entirely to human decision-making, moral conflict, and political consequences. This reveal does not diminish the Force. It expands the narrative space around it. By removing supernatural intervention, Andor underscores how much of the galaxy's fate is shaped by people who will never touch a lightsaber. The show enhances the threat of the Empire by removing the usual counterbalance. Without Force-sensitive protectors, the Empire becomes a system of absolute control, grounded in surveillance, labor exploitation, and bureaucratic indifference. Its strength is no longer framed as darkness overpowering light. It is the result of unchecked institutional expansion. This makes the Empire feel less like a mystical villain and more like a functioning authoritarian state. Andor elevates the rebellion by showing how fragile it truly is. In stories involving Jedi, rebellion often hinges on dramatic acts of supernatural heroism. In Andor, rebellion emerges through small actions, hidden messages, shared glances, improvised defiance. These incremental acts accumulate into momentum. This depiction reshapes the rebellion from mythic uprising to historical movement, giving it depth that complements rather than replaces the Force-driven narratives. The absence of the Force forces the audience to confront stakes with greater weight. When a character falls in battle, there is no spiritual explanation or predestined sacrifice. Loss becomes mechanical and political, not cosmic. Achievements gain gravity because each victory requires ingenuity, collaboration, and risk. This creates a form of narrative tension that does not rely on prophecy to define importance. It relies on consequence. Andor reframes hope through realism. In stories tied to the Force, hope often appears as an intrinsic truth, a principle rooted in cosmic balance. In Andor, hope is rare, fragile, and earned through hardship. It emerges from exhaustion, confrontation, and loss. This redefinition strengthens Star Wars by demonstrating that hope is not exclusive to mystics. It is inherent to any community resisting systemic harm. The show enriches the mythology by showing what happens when that mythology fades from public consciousness. Most people in Andor barely remember the Jedi. The Force is spoken about as rumour, superstition, or historical artifact. This absence creates narrative silence around the Force, and that silence becomes meaningful. When a galaxy forgets its spiritual language, the consequences of that amnesia reshape its political landscape. By grounding the story in realism, Andor makes the Jedi myth feel larger in retrospect. The viewer becomes aware of the contrast between a galaxy without the Force and a galaxy shaped by it. This contrast strengthens later Jedi stories by reminding audiences what the Jedi symbolized before they became myth. Andor builds context rather than competition, making supernatural arcs feel less like genre staples and more like extraordinary exceptions. The narrative also highlights how the Force influences the galaxy indirectly, even when unseen. Characters in Andor do not use the Force, but they act in ways that mirror its core principles: selflessness, sacrifice, clarity, resistance to corruption. The show presents these values as universal rather than exclusive to an order. This reframing positions the Force as a philosophical concept rather than a supernatural mechanic. Andor strengthens the thematic architecture of Star Wars by examining oppression through structural detail. It uses prisons, supply chains, recruitment networks, and local governance to reveal how authoritarianism functions on the ground. This perspective enhances Jedi stories because it clarifies what the Jedi are actually fighting against. The Empire becomes more than an abstract evil. It becomes a system that crushes communities piece by piece. The show's realism creates narrative tension without relying on spectacle. Moments like Marva's speech or the uprising in the prison carry emotional weight without requiring supernatural intervention. These scenes demonstrate that Star Wars can achieve dramatic intensity through dialogue, pacing, and political insight. The reliance on human conviction makes the universe feel broader and more adaptable. Andor deepens character arcs by exploring moral ambiguity. Characters make compromises, hide truths, and act out of conflicting motivations. This complexity reflects real resistance movements, where purity is impossible and strategy often requires sacrifice. The Force is not needed to explain these decisions. The psychology and context of human behaviour provides sufficient depth. The absence of mysticism also democratizes heroism. In Jedi-focused stories, heroism often revolves around a small number of gifted individuals. Andor redistributes heroism across entire communities. Everyone contributes. Everyone sacrifices. The movement is not saved by a chosen one, but built by ordinary people. This perspective broadens the narrative possibilities for the franchise moving forward. Andor ultimately reinforces the Force by allowing the audience to see what the galaxy becomes without its influence. The emptiness left behind is not spiritual. It is symbolic. The show highlights how much meaning the Force once held and how far the galaxy has fallen from that ideal. When Jedi stories return, they carry more weight because the contrast has been established. Andor does not weaken Star Wars. It strengthens it through differentiation. By making the Force irrelevant, Andor clarified the foundation of rebellion, hope, and political struggle. It proved that mysticism is not required for meaning. The Force may guide heroes, but the galaxy is shaped by the decisions of ordinary people. Andor showed that Star Wars is not defined by lightsabers or prophecy. It is defined by the tension between oppression and resistance. Removing the Force revealed the humanity underlying the myth, making the universe stronger in every direction.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.